Chapter 3. Kettleman paused abruptly upon seeing the man sprawled in the brush. Standing close against the trunk of a pine, Kettleman surveyed the area with extreme care. Only when he was positive that he was alone did he approach the fallen man. He lay on a gentle slope, and for concealment, he could not have fallen in a better position. Approached from any other angle, he would have been invisible. Kettleman knelt and examined the man. He was not dead. His pulse was strong. He had lost blood, but from a quick examination, Kettleman could find only a flesh wound. A bullet had cut through the heavy muscle under his arm. Gathering a few sticks of curl leaf and dried cedar, Kettleman built a small, smokeless fire, and when he had heated some water, he bathed the wound. As he walked, the man moaned, then opened his eyes and stared at Kettleman. "Who are you?" "That's what Nugent asked me, and you would better be getting out of here, because he will be coming back this way." With an effort, the man sat up. "Can you carry double?" "I got to hide. Nugent figures to kill me." "Sorry, I have no horse." Kettleman gathered his gear and stowed it. "And don't ask further help from me, because you know this country better than I do." "You ain't much help." The wounded man stared at him sourly. "What I am going to do? Your problem. But I'd begin by getting out of here, because I do think Nugent instead to kill you, and I don't blame him. You aren't much good." The wounded man's face flushed angrily. "What the hell do you know?" "I know I cleaned your wound, and you didn't even take time to thank me." Kettleman slung his packs again and picked up his weapons. "Whoever hired you had to go pretty far to find a man." "Who said anybody hired me?" The man's eyes were cunning. "Your kind is always hired," Kettleman replied, "and seldom with the coast. You are on your own." He turned sharply into the brush, not wanting his back to the man, then changed course and went into the deepest part. Moving softly as possible, turning west, again he passed the ruins of an old pueblo, and paused to study his back trail. There was no sign of movement. Then he examined the country around him, and chose the best road toward the lava beds. He wanted to keep off the horizon, not being eager to reply to inquiries, nor to encounter any of Nugent's men. An hour later, from the crest of a ridge, he could see far and away the smoke of a train. The air was very clear and fresh, and he breathed deeply. Off to the north, he could see two mesas lifting their square rocks, shoulders against the sky. One of them was striped by building, and thread of smoke went up from them. What would be a coma, the Sky City? The sky was very blue, here and there a fluff of white cloud. It was a lovely country, and too bad he had so little time left to enjoy it. For the first time he left a sharp twinge of regret, and he walked on with long, swinging strides. It would not to do fine things to love at this late date, even so fair a land. Inside him this thing was growing, slowly capturing his life, and it was better that he go remembering nothing that he wanted to remember. There was a place on the edge of Kiboleta Mesa that he had to find, where the mesa sent a rocky shoulder toward the lava beds. That point was the key to the opening he was looking for. Several times he sat down to rest, although he did not like to sit down. He had never been one to delay short of a goal. Yes, his strength was waning and his legs were growing very tired. The walking here was nothing like the walking he had done behind hunting dogs in Virginia or New Jersey. This was raw and rocky, and he had climbed nearly 3,000 feet since leaving the railroad. Skirting the edge of a wooded area, crossed a plateau dotted with small lakes and emerged within 50 yards of the point he had been seeking. Before him and some distance lower down lay the lava beds he dreaded millpays. Like a fat, enormous snake, it lay stretched across the country, a black and ugly mass of twisted, rope-like rock, clinkers and piles of lava that looked like hell with the fires out, filling its sterile sink and winding south and north for many miles. This was desolation. This was that remained after Mount Taylor and El Tintero spewed forth their flaming rock and drenched the country with liquid fire so that the Indians fled the country in terror and were long in returning. The river of lava had flowed southward, killing everything in its path, flattening stone houses or flowing through them, flowing downhill, piling up to cross over hills, falling in cascades down steep cliffs, until finally it solidified into a great stream of natural glass, leaving behind all the formation lava can create. Hardening from the outside, often the lava continued to flow beneath the surface and left vast caverns, roofed over in place by blisters of apparently solid rock that was actually egg-helmet. Splitting at place into separate stream, it left the islands of grass-like sunken parks, dotted with trees and surrounded by walls of lava sometimes 50 feet high. Underneath were perpetual ice caves. It was in one of these islands of grain Cattleman knew that Flint had found his hideout. No tracks or other evidence of travel lay in the bottom of the narrow crack Flint had followed to hiding oases. So narrow throughout most of its length that a horseman's feet brushed the lava walls on either side. It was at no place wider than a tall man's outstretched arms could reach. It wound, twisted, bent sharply, and seemed to end a dozen times before reaching a rock-walled acre of grass and trees. Against the wall, Flint had built a rock house, using the building blocks provided by the lava flow itself. Adjoining the rock house, he built a wall, closing off a cavern mouth to be used as a stable. By facing an undercut cliff with stone, he had constructed a passage from the cabin to the stable, so he could move from one to the other in perfect shelter. The cave itself was a long tunnel that led through 200 yards of rock to a much larger island of grass and trees, where a small stream flowed. In this place Flint had released several horses, one stallion, 3 mares. The entrance to the crack that led to this hideout was extremely difficult to find, and Flint had discovered it purely by accident. The opening was masked by an overlapping wall of rock, invisible from even a few feet away. Seated by the trunk of a cedar, Cattleman shat his pack and got out his glasses. The sun was far down in the west, and shadows had gathered in the hollows and cracks of the mill pails. With infinite care, Cattleman began to study the terrain below him. Far away across the lava beds, perhaps 6 or 7 miles distant, he could see an island of grain. Otherwise, what lay below him was a nightmare of dissolution and death, and he could see no other oasis, no such place as Flint had mentioned it. Turning north, he walked his way, his pack once more riding his shaft and aching shoulders, along the edge of the cliff. A path would be here, a narrow lip of a path negotiated by deer, antelope, and bear, occasionally by half-wild cattle. The sun would soon be gone. It was unlikely that he would find the crack in the wall tonight. Several times he stopped, twisted by the pain in his stomach. When he found the path, he looked upon it with awe. Flint had said a good mountain horse could manage it, but if he did, the rider's foot would hang over place. Below all was blackness. Further, all the dying sun had turned the lava beds into a red flaming mess that relived for an instant in the sunset their former molten terror. Beyond the lava miles away, a dark bulging shoulder of rock might be Amour, the inscription rock where more than 250 years before Spanish men had signed their names. Although the cliff down which he made his way lay deep in shadow, the path could be clearly seen, and the lava beds were still bathed in slowly dulling red fire. At the bottom, the path ended in a maze of boulders and rocky debris outgone, with whole brush and few stunted trees. Once he backed his shin on the edge of a rock, and again he stumbled and fell to his knees. Finally, he sat down and slid the pack from his back. He was exhausted. Cattleman had never known weakness in his life, and never illness. His physical strength was enormous, and he had learned to rely upon it. And now, for the first time, he was feeling weakness. He had walked a long way, driven on a march by determination to get where he was going as anything. He sat very still, breathing hoarsely. He felt sick at his stomach and was afraid he was going to have more of these agonizing pains. The shadows grew darker, and the light faded from the lava beds. Only the sky remained a deeper blue, and here and there a bright star hung against the sky like a lamp. Still he did not move. His breathing eased, and the pains did not come, yet still he waited. It was too late to find the crack in the rock now, and it might take him days, even with the landmarks Flint had provided. It was odd. All through the years he had kept this place in mind, as he had known that some day he would come here. He had no faith in people. He had avoided all close contacts with them when possible. Occasionally he had tricked himself into little kindness from some deep, inner instinct, or perhaps some vague desire to warmth and friendship. But he had brusquely rejected all thanks and fled from appreciation. He had never hated his wife or her father for what they had planned to do, nor for the times they had tried to profit by the connection. He did not hate them, for he had been taught to expect nothing better, and they were acting as he expected people to act. From the day of his arrival in the East, he had known but one ambition, and that was for wealth and power. He fought as Flint had taught him to fight, but using the weapons of his knowledge gained at school. His reading since that time, and the information accurate from day to day. He acted coldly, ruthlessly, yet shrewdly. Cattleman's first job in the East was driving a hansom cab, and he had deliberately sought it as a way to learn the town, to see where the various types of people gathered, and to learn where the money was. He overheard the discussion between two businessmen of a building they planned to put up, and the way they intended to acquire the property for it. He moved in quickly the next morning at daybreak, bought an option on a key lot, and sold it 2 weeks later for a substantial profit. Then he found a job as a messenger for a brokerage house where he worked for a year, keeping his mouth shut and his eyes and ears open. He carefully kept his stake intact, and from time to time made small investments from it. A year after his arrival in New York, he had tripled his original stake. Each investment had been based upon information obtained during his working hours, and he never forgot how much a pair of attentive ears can overhear. Later, when he was in a position to do so, he deliberately hired such men to listen for him. Businessmen often discussed their affairs as though the driver of the hansom was thief, and the information was often of value.
He was startled from his dreaming by the click of a hoof on stone, and he returned his head to see a rider coming down the trail along the lava beds. Behind him was strung out a bunch of cattle, well concealed. Cattlemen had only to sit still and allow them to pass. 3 more riders brought up the rear, and he did not need to be told why the cattle were being moved at such an hour. The last of the riders trailed some distance behind, and when he was almost up to Cattleman, he drew up. It was completely dark now. Cattleman knew the rider had come to a halt because of the cessation of movement, and then he heard a creak of saddle leather as the man moved slightly in the saddle. Cattleman made no move except to turn the shotgun toward the sound. He heard a match strike, and through the leaves he could see the lights reveal momentarily. Not a face as would be expected, but a hand. The rider had held the fire away from him, expecting to draw a shot. Cattleman was amused, but he did not move. The match was dropped, and then another one lighted. "Well," the voice was a soft drawl. "Don't reckon you plan to shoot me, so why don't we talk?" The horse stomped restlessly, but the man-called Cattleman made no move. The unseen rider drew a cigarette down to the match, bending his head to meet his cupped hand, rather than otherwise. Cattleman caught a brief glimpse of a gaunt, hard-boned face, and then the match was blown out, and there was only the glow from the cigarette. "This horse," the soft drawl continued, "is a good night horse. Broke him from a wild bunch, and he is worth his weight in gold to a night riding man. He spotted you first off. If you had been a horse, he would have whinnied. If you had been a concreter, he would have caught out after you, and he would shy from a bear or a lion. So you have got to be a man." The rider paused. "Something different about you, too. I can tell that by his attitude." Cattleman remained still, curious to see what the rider would do next, and when the rider did speak, his voice was plaintive. "Now see here, I know my part. It's up to you. How is folks to get acquainted with somebody is so standoffish? If you are afraid of crowds, you needn't be. That bunch up ahead are gone to hell, and gone by now. They sure are skittish." "Why, I mind a time down in Texas. Say, who are you, anyhow?" Cattleman decided the man's sharpness deserved its reward. It took a man with acute senses to detect from the actions of a riding horse that he was not alone, and in the dark at that. "I am a man who minds his own affairs," he said aloud, "and that's all I ask of others. Talks mightily well, he does. Talks like a man who had shoeling, and I'd say there ain't too many of that kind around this neck of the hills." "You might," the rider said suddenly, "jump the wrong fence and figure me for a rustler. As a matter of fact, I have rustled a few head, time to time, but that was in another country and a long time back. In spite of how I looked, I wasn't with those day boys. Not in the rustling. You see, I know them, and I could figure that where they were, rattling would be, so I thought I'd write out tonight and read them from the book. Sort of set up an misunderstanding, like they do as they might, as long as they lay off the outfit I write for. If they jump my brand, I told them I'd came hunting. The stop of the cigarette described a brief hours, and the heat against the lava, then lost itself in the rocks. Mightly one-sided, this here conversation, the writer said. But if you happen to be one of those traveling Gunslanders who are riding into this country, you lay off the Khyber. We don't want any trouble. Neither do I, Cattleman said, and we are not likely to run into each other again. There was a silence for a minute or two, but the rider showed to disposition to move on. Cattleman could almost sense the man's curiosity. Finally the rider said, "Now there's a strange thing. You say I will not see you again. Run into you, I mean. This is a big country, but not so big that folks can miss each other very easy. I'm going to be around. What's going to happen to you that I won't see you?" When there was no reply, the rider said, "This is a good country, friend." He paused and then he added, "If you're in the Dodge, you might like to know there isn't even a town marshal in Alamitos. Never needed one. Folks ain't inclined to pry, although there's newcomers around. Some of them are building up to be mighty unpopular." "I know nothing about things here," Cattleman replied, "and I have no interest in local affairs." He found himself liking the cool, quiet-talking man. He heard a whisper of paper and knew the man was building another cigarette. "You're not from hereabouts, or I'd recall your voice," the rider said, "and I know almost everybody around. You don't fit anywhere, unless you're a friend or both. Baldwin." Cattleman felt a cold wind blowing down the canyon. He waited and then he said, "I don't know the man. Does he live here?" "Newcomer, from back east somewhere. He just moved into the country with 40,000 head of cows, and that means he's got to crowd everybody off their ranch. I think he knew that when he come in." Porter Baldwin? He had never met him, but he knew his name. It was one of those things he believed he had left behind. "Is he the one who is importing the gunfighters?" "That's the one, although Tom Nugent made to the same." "And what about your outfit?" "Khyber?" The man chuckled. "I suppose the boys over there would say I was the gunfighter for Khyber. I would not claim the job for myself, but they might claim it for me. And there's a salty bunch at Khyber. The colonel knew how to pick them." "Knew?" "He's died. His daughter handles the outfit." "How does a girl figure to lead a war?" "If a girl can't do it, this one can. She's a girl to ride the river with, I'd say. I would not want a better loss." The rider was silent for a few minutes, then said, "I'm going to ride along." He paused. "You got grub? Coffee?" "Thanks, I do have them. But no horse, and that's a curious thing. A man afoot in this country isn't going far." The rider turned his mount. "If you want to look me up, you ask for Pete Geddes." Cattleman listened to the sound of the retreating horse, strangely drawn to the man who had talked so quietly into the night. Geddes had wanted to talk, and to a stranger. So Porter Baldwin? The past then was not so far behind, yet Baldwin could have no idea that Cattleman was anywhere around. So what was Baldwin planning? Why had Baldwin suddenly come into this area with 40,000 head of cattle? Baldwin knew nothing of cattle and was not likely to get interested in them. His mind, long turned to business combat, now began to seek out causes and effects. searching for the hidden motivation behind Baldy's move. Gaddis had said, "That means he's got to cross somebody off their ranch. That must be it." The interest then was not cattle, but land. Land here was held by big cattle outfits, the government or the railroad. And Baldwin had done no negotiating with the railroad. The moon was rising, and he had not considered the moon. Living in cities, a man rarely looked at the sky. He shouldered his pack, hung the rifle from his shoulder by its length, and carrying the shotgun. He started out. When he was opposite the point of rock, he crossed by dry watercourse and bedded down among the rocks. During the night he was awakened by pain. The pain twisted his vitals, and he grew weak and sick, and it was a long time before it passed off, and he slept. When he awakened again, he was weak and drenched with cold sweat. He got up and built a small fire and huddled over it, shivering and chilled. The moonlight lay weirdly upon the ghostly rocks, and threw eerie shadows along the sandy way where the water had gone. Off to the east, the wall of the mesa lifted, towering black against the sky, and down came slowly from a cold sky, and he did not make coffee or eat. The gnawing pain in his stomach stayed with him, but he got up and shouldered his pack. He could not be far from the entrance to the hideout. The wall of lava was about 50 feet along here, huge black blocks of it, and then in places great wrinkled bulges like the skin of a sleeping elephant. He walked along a few steps, stepping from rock to rock where possible and holding close to the wall for fear of missing the entrance. There was a lot of brush, stiff, wiry, and filled with thorns, clumps of prickly pear, and fierce catalytic pines. He had gone only 100 yards or so when he felt a sickness in his stomach, and he paused and leaned against the rope. He was frightened. The last thing he wanted was to die here, where he could be found. He must disappear, vanish completely. He waited, leaning against the rope. Finally he started on again. Only now his mind was made up. If he felt himself going, he would use the last of his strength to crawl out of the lava bed. It would be a long time before they found him there. The man called Cattleman crawled down through the rocks and lowered himself into a hollow space, where water had spilled over some boulders after heavy rains, then climbed up the bank. He had gone only a mile when he looked up at the wall opposite. There was a slash of white quartz there. Somehow he had missed the opening. How he could have done so he could not imagine. But miss he had. Turning, he retraced his steps. Twice he rested. It was almost noon before he found it. There was no brush concealing the opening. There was no jumble of boulders right at that point. The wall of the lava broke a slight bend, but in the open, where there was no evidence of any kind of entrance. Cattleman had passed the place 3 times, thinking he had seen everything. The lava was cracked and split in many places, and right before him there was such a split, a crack that seemed no more than 3 inches wide. Yet when he stepped back he caught a glimpse out of the corner of his eye of what appeared to be an optical illusion. He looked again. There was something wrong with the perspective in that crack. He walked slowly toward it, and then he was right up to the log. He saw what it was. The left edge stood out almost for free from the other side, and there was an opening that ran back into the rock parallel to the face. It seemed to go no more than 6 or 7 feet and end in black hole. Yet, when he stepped inside, he saw that it went back into the lava. Turning, he went back to the edge of the opening, and standing there, he carefully surveyed the lip of the cliff opposite. For a long time he stayed there, letting his eyes rove along the cliff. Only then did he move out from the rock and carefully brush away the few tracks he had made. Returning to the opening in the wall, he paused again to scan the rim of the cliff, but there was no sign of movement. He walked into the narrow, winding crack, which steadily grew narrow and deeper down, deeper and deeper. It was wide enough for a horse if the steering were dried up, and the overhang would prevent its being seen from above. Should anyone venture out upon the lava, an extremely remote chance. No man would venture upon the lava. Deer had been driven there by wolves, but their feet and legs became so badly lacerated they could not walk further, and they died here. It took him almost an hour to reach the hideout in the lava beds, and when he arrived he stopped, deeply stirred by the beauty of the little houses. The sides rose steeply and curved inward at the top. The area at the bottom was scarcely an acre in extent, but a small stream ran from under the rock on one side, meandered across and lost itself under the lava again. There were several fruit trees planted by Flint, and a patch of cheer, whose seed was used as food by the Indians. Until he had looked for several minutes, he did not see the cabin, for it was merely the walled face of rocky overhang, the entrance shadowed by a cottonwood. He walked slowly across the open grass toward the slit in the rock wall that apparently served as a window. He went past it, and he found the door. It was a slab door, thick and strong. The man called cattleman unlatched it and stepped inside. The room was larger than he expected, with 2 bunks built against the far wall. There was a table, 2 chairs, hooks on the wall, and a bench with a wash basin. There was a trickle of running water from the spring, and from both the door, the window, the opening into the basin could be seen, and the entire basin covering. There was a broom. He dusted off the bed, then dumped his own gear on it. Carefully he swept, then built a small fire and made tea. When he had his tea and some hot broth, he went to the door and sat down on the stoop, looking out over the hollow. This was the place. It was here he was going to die.